town this weekend, heading for the hills. The hills or Las Vegas. Looks like we may already have some gone. Okay. We're in lesson 5. We've been talking about when Jesus returned. Last week we talked about what will happen when Jesus returned, and we basically said that it's going to be a really noisy affair when he comes. This evening we're going to talk about this question here: where are the dead, and how do they fit in eschatology and so forth? So that's where we're going to be talking about this evening. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we will get into a portion of the lesson. Our great God and Father in heaven, we are most thankful for this opportunity of being here this evening, being with brothers and sisters, being able to open up your word, Father. What a privilege that is to be able to do that and to be in a country, Father, that allows us this safe haven of being able to study and to be with brothers and sisters. Pray that you be with us tonight as we open up your word and as we do some discussing, and that you would open our hearts and our minds to the truths that you are setting before us, and that we would make application and certainly build our faith with the things that we're going to be studying. We ask for your help in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So when I talk about being able to, when I was talking to the Father here just a moment ago about being able to worship in a place without, well, I didn't use these words, but being any fear of being molested or harried or anything like that. Not everyone feels that way. As you know, I go over to Cameroon and over on the Anglophone part of Cameroon, the English side. They're in kind of they're almost in a civil war over there. They are, some of the lawyers and teachers and people of that nature are kind of rising up against the government, and the result of that is the soldiers or the government sending soldiers into that side. And I was Dennis Asipiko that we have helped support with monies, and we bought him a farm last year. We were asking him how things were going. I think it was just yesterday, or maybe it was today. And Dennis we were asking him if they are frightened or anything like that. And he says, "Oh, very much so." He goes, "We were spending many nights out in the forest." That's the jungle to us, but we're spending many nights out in the forest hiding because the soldiers are coming into many of the villages and are burning them and killing people. And so he says, so we've had to spend quite a few nights out there. So keep them in your prayers. Obviously, a good time for soldiers to come is when churches are meeting, because you can get a whole lot of people all at once. And so anyway, so keep those folks in your prayer because they're going through some difficulty. So where are the dead? There's a lot of talk about this. I just saw this just the other day. City official apologizes for erroneous zombie alert in Lake Worth, Florida. Power outage and zombie alert for residents of the Lake Worth and Terminus. There are now far less than 7,380 customers involved due to the extreme zombie activity. Restoration time uncertain. So anyway, he put this out, and then he had to do a bunch of apologizing for making such a statement as that. But in our world, there are a lot of people who are really interested in this, in where dead people are. Back in the 60s and 70s, I remember there was a movie that came out that became almost a cult type movie. It was called The Night of the Living Dead. And some kind of virus or germ, or I don't even remember what it was, attacked the planet and caused people to come out of their graves, or they didn't look like they'd been in their graves very long, but anyway, to come out and they were alive and they're going around and biting people and eating people and things like that. And I think I was maybe 16 or 17 years old, probably 16 years old when I saw that movie and so forth. So zombies are a really big thing. One of the biggest TV shows AMC that puts out is the TV show The Walking Dead. You know, and I've seen a couple of those, you know, just because was curious, what is this all about? And I mean, there's only so many ways you can kill a zombie, you know, by sticking them or shooting them in the head or something like that. But anyway, crazy stuff. But people are really interested. Some huge movies have been put out, you know, that have had to do with zombies or with dead people and things of that nature. So people are really curious about that. And as a result of that, there's lots of... seems to be a societal hunger for zombie shows and dead people shows and things of that nature. People are interested in that when it comes down to seances or Ouija boards or things of that nature that help them contact the dead. So the question is, where are the dead? Is what's really there? Well, Paul obviously, people of his day had questions about their loved ones and their dead. And over in 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, we looked into that from verses 13 and going on down from that section. And there, Paul says, I don't want you to be concerned about those who have fallen asleep in the Lord, And then he talks about what's going to happen and so forth. So Paul writes them to assure the Thessalonians that their beloved ones, those who have died, will not be in any way disadvantaged when the return of Christ comes. And so I said to you last week that one of the concerns that they had is not so much about their loved ones not being resurrected or anything like that. Their concern is they're going to miss the parousia. They're going to miss this great event of the second coming. The greatest event that will ever happen on planet Earth is going to be the second coming of Christ. The first greatest one, of course, was Jesus coming into our world. But the second greatest one that's really going to be an effect in terms of salvation for all mankind will be when Jesus returns. And so Paul, he's addressing these kinds of things. But naturally, there's going to be questions that arise that even we have. And that is, well, where are the dead? Where do they reside? After a person dies, where does their spirit go? We know their body goes to the dust, it goes to the grave, but where does their spirit go? And in what state do they exist? That doesn't mean in Nevada or in Idaho or Colorado, but in what state? What's the disposition of their soul or their spirit? Are they conscious about what is going on? Are they aware of what's going on? Or are they just asleep? Or they are just unconscious to what's going on? So those kinds of questions come into people's minds. So this question not only concerns our loved ones, but it's an anticipation of our own departure into that realm. Because as I've been talking on Sunday mornings about the highway to heaven, I've talked to you about one road leads to two destinations, either in heaven or it leads to hell. But what happens after you get on the other side of this life? Because there's a lot more on the other side of the grave than are on this side of the grave. And those things come into our minds. And that's where our lesson is going to start this evening. And so the story of the rich man and Lazarus. It starts in chapter 16 and reads from 19 down through the end. So let's go ahead and read this, okay? And then I'll go back and give you a few precursory ideas that I have about it, or thoughts that I have about it, and then we'll get a little bit more deeper into it. Now there was a certain rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, gaily living in splendor every day. And a certain poor man, Lazarus, was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now it came about that the poor man died, and he was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died, and he was buried. And in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us and you, there is a great chasm fixed in order that those who wish to come over from here to you may not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. But he said, No, Father, I hear Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. That last verse, probably never truer words have ever been spoken. I guess all the words are true spoken, but certainly those ones, even one rises from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead. It doesn't seem to have affected people a whole lot in that way. This story depicts mutually exclusive states separated by an impassable gulf. That's what's going on here. Now, as a precursor to what I think about this section of Scripture is I think that everything that Jesus has to say, he's not going into depth about heaven or hell. He's giving you some insight to it, but it's not definitive. It's not a clear-cut picture. And some of the reason for that may be the fact that if you study the Old Testament and you study about heaven or hell, nothing much of really is talked about. It talks about Sheol, which is the Hebrew terms for Hades in the New Testament and so forth. And we'll talk some a little bit more about that later, but there's a very limited view of what heaven and hell was about and what happened once you passed from this life to the next. So they had a very limited scope about what those things were about. You, as New Testament Christians, have a lot more. Even though you basically have a mirror itself, you have a lot more in terms of the book of Revelation from chapters 20 through chapter 22. You have more of a picture or an idea of what heaven might consist of and maybe what heaven might be like. In this section of Scripture, you get another glimpse of what heaven might be like as well as what hell might be like. You get pictures of that. And so I believe what Jesus is doing is he is teaching people from where they are intellectually, what they're able to understand, what they're able to grasp, okay? So when he talks about being in Abraham's bosom, well, to all Jews, Abraham was the head patriarch. He was the father of the faith, the Hebrew of Hebrews, if you will. And so to be with Abraham was to be in a really good place. And they would all make that association and make that understanding. For him to talk about a place of agony or a place of torment, they would get that as well. Because they have passed through places like the Valley of Hinnom, and they saw some pretty ugly things outside that city and that great big old dump ground that was out there. They saw a lot of ugly things that were there as well. And so it's my opinion is that Jesus is talking to people in terms of what they can understand at this point, but it's not a definitive kind of thing. It's much like what I've said to you about when you talk about new heavens and new earth over in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter. It's hard for us to get our minds around heaven itself and all that's going to be there. So I think he uses terminology that we do understand. We understand what the earth is about. We understand what the heavens are about in terms of the lower atmosphere and then the higher atmosphere into the universe and so forth. We kind of grasp that, and so he uses that kind of imagery to teach a lesson about that. Or when you talk about the closeness that Jesus Christ has with the church, rather than Paul just saying, you know what, Jesus really loves the church and he loves her with this kind of love and that kind of love. He talks about a relationship between a husband and a wife to show you the closeness of it. He uses an analogy that you are able to get your minds around. Or when he talks about how we are connected to one another as a church, he used the analogy of a human body, how each part in the human body is important. And so I think when he talks about this section here about an eternal destiny beyond the grave, he uses terminology that his readers are going to be able to understand as well as what we might be able to understand as well, though we have more information than they have, okay? Now, there is some debate as to whether this story told here is a parable or whether it is something that is literal. And it all depends on who you look at and who you read. Even in our own brotherhood, we have people who are on this side and there are people who are on that side. So here's the question, what do you think? So how many of you think that this is a parable? Raise your hand. How many of you think this is literal? That this is a literal thing here? Okay. So if you were standing where I am and looking out, you would see that as our class, some of you decide to abstain and not put your hands up, but some of you said, okay, I've come to a position, and so some said, I think it is a parable, and others say, no, I think it is a literal case. Does anyone want to take just a really quick shot at this in terms of why you think it's a parable, and then why you think it's literal? Are you a parable or a literal? You're literal, so why do you think it's literal? Okay. Okay. So okay.
The Good Samaritan.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Even when you talk about the prodigal son, you don't have a names given even to those characters there. Anyone else want to dive into this just a little bit? You want to do the parable? Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Well, let me just share with you some of the things that I've looked at, okay, in terms of arguments to go one way or the other. Arguments for Lazarus and the rich man being a parable. Well, it comes in a list of parables. Beginning in the 15th chapter, you have one parable after another that is going down the pike here with a short interlude with a discussion of the Pharisees before he goes in and he talks about Lazarus and the rich man. He does a discussion about the lost coin. He does a parable about the woman or the lost sheep, and then the lost coin, and then the prodigal, and then the unrighteous servant, and so forth. And he gives those stories there, and we know those are parable because they're compared to things. But we know, in reality, that we are not sheep. We're not sheep. We're not woolies. We don't have little legs that walk around. So we know that's symbolism. And the same way with a coin, we're not coins that get lost somewhere. We could be prodigals, but probably not to that extent. But it comes in a list of parables, and because it comes in a list of parables, those who argue for the parabolic interpretation say that, you know what, it only makes sense that you just stay with what Jesus is doing, that he's not going to change, he's not going to change tactics in the middle of a discourse. It contains impossible conversations, some say. It's an impossibility for human beings to talk with dead people. We don't do that. Okay, no one does that. You don't talk with the dead people. It'd be even more scary to think that you're in heaven and you're looking down at people who are tormented in hell. So the idea of being in a place and looking down and seeing things or having a discussion, those conversations are not happening. Those are more of a story kind of thing. So it contains impossible conversation. It uses clear symbology or imagery. The image of a finger coming out with a single drop of water on it to drop it on the tip of a person's tongue to give them some relief when they're in anguish, when in reality you think, oh, what? Okay, that's not going to happen. If you were a person out in the middle of a desert and you're super, super, super thirsty and someone put a drop of water on your tongue, probably not going to do a whole lot for you. But if you're in a lot of pain and so forth, then you think it would. So the idea is it uses clear imagery that is it's designed to do something, but it's not something that is a real kind of thing. Uses a lot of figurative expressions. We've kind of talked about that. So those are some of the arguments that for it being a parable. Okay, it just falls on the list of parables. It's not clear. It's got clear imagery that is used there. It's a lot of symbolism and so forth. Now, what are the arguments for Lazarus and the rich man being a literal story? Now, this is bigger. All the slides I'm giving you are bigger, but they're not bigger because that's what I believe more. Okay, it's kind of like Isaiah is a major prophet, not because it's more major than Malachi. It's just that it's a bigger book. Okay, it doesn't have a more important message. So arguments for Lazarus and the rich man being a literal story. Parables are true to life, but hypothetical illustrative stories. For instance, when you look at what's the definition of a parable? Yeah, it's an earthly story. Some say it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning or with a spiritual meaning. So it uses usually a short fictitious story that illustrates a moral attitude or a religious principle. Is the idea here? So parables are true to life, but they're illustrative stories and so forth. But this one here seems to have a realism to it, and one of the realisms to it is what was mentioned by Art here, is because it has specific names of individuals that are never given in any other parables. Another one is that generally when Jesus is getting ready to tell a parable, he tells you he's going to tell a parable, where he doesn't do that here. And so the names seem to be there: Lazarus and Abraham, Moses, even the prophets. All of these are real people. And so there seems to be a realism to it because of the fact that he uses real names like Abraham or like Moses or like Lazarus. It's interesting he doesn't give the name of the rich man. Some of the argument for that is this next one here. It's down the line here a little bit, but is that there's a realism in that these people might have known some of these people involved here, and that makes it more of a real kind of thing. It does not have a normal form of parable with introduction and analogy in a story and an application. It doesn't do any of that. It just tells, it's in a narrative kind of form, like a real life story given for the purpose of an illustration. Okay, so there seems to be that kind of feeling that it's not a parable because of the narration of it. It does not use the principle of comparison in ways that is characteristic of parables. It doesn't, I mean, it's not like a dragnet. It's not like a person going out and sowing wheat and tares. It's not like, see what I'm saying? It's not like the parable of the sower, where you have all these things that are come together and comparisons made within the parable itself. The discussion between the rich man and Abraham is not consistent with the parabolic style found in the scriptures. There's a conversation going on here between the parties and so forth. You don't find that in the parables. It seems obvious that in relating this particular story, when he did, the Lord was using real life account that many of those listening to him of that day could really relate to, because they actually knew, or at least knew of, the two men involved. Some say, well, maybe even the rich man's brothers may have been in the audience. Of course, that's a lot of speculation, obviously. A lot of speculation that is there, but it's just given a sense of a real feel to what is going on here. So when you talk about this story here, there are those who really come down, there are some who can get pretty dogmatic about it and say it's a literal story, okay? But at the same time, when you say it's a literal, you have to take into account that there are some things there that just aren't going to happen in real time or in real life, okay? And then there's those who say it's a parable. Both have strong things, but here's what I've come down to, okay? I may have one that I lean more towards, okay? But whether it's a parable or to be taken literally, it rests upon an accurate principle. It represents an accurate thing, and that is that when you die, you're going to go someplace. And one place is good and one place is bad, and you don't want to go to the bad place. Larry?
Is the parable literal? There was a let's pretend well, this is
Mm-hmm.
First of chapter 16, he says, there was a rich man. When we get down to verse 19, there was a rich man.
A certain rich man. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think of how I could.
was or there wasn't.
Mm-hmm. There was a dragnet. There was a pearl of great price. There was, so, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't know if I agree with you, but, and I don't think I'm calling Jesus a liar by saying I don't think I agree with you, but that's okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Charles. Uh-huh. Yeah. But my point is simply that whichever way you take it, it's based on an accurate principle that Jesus taught. Just like the parable of the sower is accurate, the parable of the dragnet is accurate, the parable of the tares is accurate, all of his parables that he teaches are accurate things. He just uses metaphors and symbology to do it. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So what John said is that our actions or our deeds determine what side of the gulf we might find ourselves on. Okay. That's basically what he's got down to. Two states are depicted without a doubt. And a chasm is there, or a chasm is there. So where do we go when we die? And some have used this as a teaching on a Hadean realm. And you have behind me a picture of that Hadean realm where you see the saved go here to paradise, or Abraham's bosom. The lost go to torments, and there's a great gulf that's fixed between them. At the end of this life is a reward, a judgment day where rewarded people go to heaven, condemned people go to hell or Gehenna or a lake of fire. A more involved one that's put out by Steve Rudd is a little bit more involved in terms of a Hadean realm where he gets down to a lot of specifics and so forth, where the faithful till death go to Abraham's bosom, infants go to Abraham's bosom, unfaithful who fell away go to Tartarus or torment or anguish, all non-Christians same place, and so forth, and eventually to a judgment scene, and then to eternal life and to hell. So some have, because strictly almost from Luke chapter 16, has it been evolved a Hadean, what they call a Hadean realm, or if you just want to make a single circle and a gulf, a paradise on one side and torment on the other side. The rich man on the torment side and Lazarus on the paradise side in Abraham's bosom. When you look at them, you see that there is a torment. That there, on one side, one is being tormented in this flame, and on the other side is one who is being comforted. And so you have the rich man who is on the tormented side, and then afar off, or a gulf that is fixed, that Abraham says, no man can pass. We can't come to you. You can't come to us. These positions are fixed in eternity, and you cannot cross one way or another. So there's Abraham's bosom, and the Lazarus is there, and he's being comforted. And on the other side of torment is the rich man. Additional features. This story indicates that there's a consciousness that continues after death. Once you die doesn't mean that you cease or being able to feel or to think or to emote. Though no response from Lazarus, it suggests that both Abraham and the rich man are portrayed as thinking and communicating individuals. The rich man knows he's in torment. He feels the torment. He knows what's going on in his life. Abraham is communicating to him. How that goes, I don't know. It simply says that there's a communication that goes on there, and the rich man is saying, listen, just send Lazarus over here that he can just take a single drop of water on his tip of his finger and put it on my tongue so I can be relieved of some of this agony and torment that I am in. And Abraham says, nope, can't do that. That cannot happen. Or send Lazarus back then to my 5 brothers, let him tell them about how they don't want to come to this place of torment. I can't get out of it, but they need not come here. And of course, Abraham's answer to him is he got Moses and the prophets, let him listen to them. And even if a person did rise from the grave, doesn't mean they're going to listen. So my point at this junction here is when you talk about what is the state of the dead is that they are conscious individuals. Notes on Hades and Sheol, the words that are used here in this discussion of Lazarus and the rich man. Notes on Hades and Sheol. The New Testament term for Hades corresponds with the Old Testament term Sheol and refers to the realm where disembodied spirits reside. We're not told their state. We're not told what it's like. We just know that it could be a dark place. It could be the place where the kings have went or their prophets have went. We're not told a whole lot about it, except for it is a place for disembodied spirits to reside. Jesus himself, Acts tells us, went to Hades, or went to that place and returned there after at his resurrection. So Jesus experienced that realm, wherever it was or whatever was involved in it. He went there. And we'll see later on that he may have led captivity captive from it. Sheol simply refers to the unseen world to which all men and women were gathered. So there's no exceptions there. And so in the Old Testament, it is Sheol. In the New Testament, you see the word Hades, and they are speaking about one and the same place. Hades is a different word and place than the final abode of the unbelieving. In this section here, the word Hades is used, which is just the unseen world, or where the disembodied spirits reside and so forth. But when you start talking about hell, or Gehenna, then you get a completely different feel altogether about that place. And if you look at Tartarus, then you get a whole different feeling about that place. When you look at the lake of fire, you get a whole different kind of feeling about that you don't get when you talk about Hades, okay? So Hades is both and. Hades is paradise, or Abraham's bosom, and Hades is also torment. So it's both and. It's a place where disembodied spirits are going to reside. The hell, or Gehenna, is an interesting. If you look at that section of scripture there, then you begin to read things like a place of outer darkness, or a place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, a place where there is a fire that burns but it does not consume, or it doesn't melt things down, that there is maggots there that eat on things but they don't consume. I mean, you're talking about just an awful, ugly kind of description of a place you don't want to be. I don't think I have this on here, but the Valley of Hinnom, if you've studied much about the Valley of Hinnom that was outside the walls of Jerusalem, then almost all the things that Jesus uses there in Mark and Matthew and Luke to describe hell itself, you could almost visualize it if you had been an occupant of Jerusalem of that day, or a citizen of Jerusalem at that day, and if you made any trips out to the dump ground, because in the dump ground is where they threw all their trash and all their refuse, but it's also where they threw dead animals. It's also places that they sometimes would throw human beings that were unclaimed bodies, or criminals that had been executed and had no one that would claim the body. They went out to Gehenna. They went out and were just tossed out there. It was a place that was constantly burning. It was a place that would turn your stomach to smell it. It was a place where dogs fought over dead animals as well as dead humans, where that's the gnashing of the teeth part, the weeping of people, you know. I don't know if the outer darkness is there, but if it's dark at night, and unlike our city where it's dark, you know, lights are burning and we can kind of see around. When it's dark in a world like that, where they lived according to, you know, palm oil and things of that nature, then the cities didn't lit up like they do today. And so darkness outside the wall was dark. In my day, it was called dark 30, extremely dark out there. But you could see the fires of Gehenna. You could see what was going on there, and the smells didn't leave and things like that. So hell is all these things here that you might want, as you look at it, write down notes and take a look at that and see that that's just absolutely horrible, horrible place. Tartarus is the place reserved for the devil and the angels and so forth, and for those who are going to go there. The lake of fire in Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15, those whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life or in the book of life, whose names are written in the books and still, that's where they're going to be thrown, is into a lake of fire, which John calls a second death. And so you can die physically, but there's going to be the realization of this spiritual death. It's going to be extremely terrible. Then there's Abraham's bosom. And when you talk about Abraham's bosom, some refer to this as paradise itself. So in your mind's eye, what does paradise mean? What does paradise mean? Anita? Okay. So Anita says paradise is where God is. For her, that's where it is. Alex? Okay, return to Eden. Okay. Carolyn? Okay, a good place? Okay, good place. You know, there's a lot of things that you can say about paradise, but in secular usage, it's referred to parks and gardens of the Persian kings, walled enclosures of natural beauty cultivated and monitored by royal caretakers. You might have heard of Nebuchadnezzar's hanging gardens. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world, they say, to go inside these gardens. Now, true, in some of these hanging gardens, he showed hanging heads as well, other human heads that he would hang throughout the garden of his enemies and so forth. But the garden itself was absolutely incredibly beautiful. The term was used in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, to describe the Garden of Eden, as Alex mentioned, the king's force, or Solomon's gardens. So paradise is used as something incredible, incredibly beautiful. So when you talk about Eden, sometimes we talk about it being a paradise that fell, or a fallen paradise. So paradise brings up the imagery in our mind of this would be a wonderful place to be. And in terms of Abraham's bosom and Lazarus, that was a place of great comfort for him. I mean, he had been a man who was a poor man. He was a starving man. He had sores all over his body, and he longed just to have the crumbs off this rich man's table, and so forth. And so now he's in this place of incredible comfort and so forth. What were Jesus' words about paradise? Well, to the thief on the cross, you remember, they're hanging on the cross, and he says to the thief, he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Okay? Whatever the condition upon which the offer is extended, Jesus is promising an immediate transport to paradise upon his death. When you die, you'll be with me. And we've already learned that Jesus went to the Hadean realm, because Acts chapter 2. He says that he went there, overcame it, and came back. And so some would say that he went there, he overcame hell itself, conquered heaven, or was the conqueror of heaven, and paradise itself. And he says, today, that's where you're going to be with me. Okay? So it was a real thing. The implication is that the thief was going to be conscious of being in paradise. He's not going to die on the cross and then go into an unconscious state, but it's going to be something that he's going to be enjoying, like the rich man in the story here. Thus, Jesus promises the penitent man that both of them would be in paradise on that day. As soon as they died, that's where they were going to go. Okay? Richard. What translation did I use? Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. I just took it off. I don't know if that's a New American Standard or if that's King James. I usually use the New American Standard, though. Okay, so what's your, do you have a point? Okay, so mine says, truly, this is the one that Paul used. So, truly I say to you, comma, today you shall be with me in paradise, period.
You got the comma on the other side. I say to you today, comma.
Okay, truly I say to you, comma, today you will be with me in paradise. Truly I say to you today, comma, you shall be. I don't know what the difference is there, but. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm talking to you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, that's too deep for me, I guess. Well, you do know there's no commas in the original text. So obviously the guys who put comma there knows Greek better than I do or something. I don't know. Yes?
Some of your charts, they talk about
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing with this story here is not only do you talk about parables, not only do you talk about literal things, but you end up in allegories where you start assigning the rich men were the Pharisees and Lazarus represented the Gentiles, and it just you go in all kinds of directions when you start allegorizing the thing, and so obviously you can draw lots of principles or applications from this story here, but I think the main point is simply saying that there is two destinations, and you're going to go to one of them, so make sure you're right. Yeah. Well, it says that he was aware of it or conscious of what was going on. Paul's words about paradise. Paul says that he had been privileged to see paradise. He said that he was lifted up into the third heaven, which means to go beyond the atmosphere and the outer space to the third heaven. And Paul said of that place that the description was so incredible that he couldn't even talk about it. And I don't know why he didn't say he wouldn't talk about it. If he wouldn't talk about it because it was too lofty and too glorious to even explain to mortal ears, or why. He did say that it was so glorious that it would tempt him to exalt himself above measure. So in verse 7 and following, it says that he is given a thorn in the flesh to keep him humble. And that's why he kept praying that you remove this thorn from me, remember, and God says, my grace is sufficient for you. So next week we'll take up and finish this thing off about what Paul's words were about paradise. Okay? All right, thank you.